Hello, viewers. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry about the delay. It was unavoidable. I had to take care of some things, phone call stuff. But yeah, I'm here now. I plan on going a little bit further than usual to make up for the time. So just gonna go until everything is just gonna be pushed half an hour further. So I will jump into it in just a second. I have to turn the air conditioner on. It's getting pretty hot in here. I'm gonna bring up chat and we'll be ready to go. All right. So, just to do a little quick review of what we did yesterday. What was covered yesterday. It was predominantly just a review of everything that we've learned the previous week, just to refresh your memory on all the little lessons and just important things to keep in mind when you are just starting to draw, whether you're a beginner or just as in when you sit down to draw during the day. So just a couple of things to just keep in mind and help you improve your technique, teach yourself good habits so that you don't have to fight them off later. So that was pretty much what was covered. And then we're just jumping into creating the form of the figure using basic shapes. And just practicing using these basic shapes to create the figure in action. And that's what we will continue doing today. Oh, and I guess we could do a quick review of the lesson prior to it as well, of just how important it is to make sure that when you are first drawing, or when you're drawing in general, to include guidelines in a sense, so that your eye could get used to the proper proportion, the proper position, as well as you could see over here. Sometimes, and this happens a lot with beginners and even intermediate illustrators, is not really paying attention to how balanced their figure is. How balanced is the pose? Does it look like the character or person is tilting over? So these guidelines kind of help prevent that in a sense. So you could see over here how you could start off with drawing the head, and if you don't sketch lightly and you're pressing really hard, and then by the time you get to the foot, you're like, oh wait, it's leaning, and that doesn't look right. This is the same example of a different perspective, or a frontal shot. This is the profile shot, and just examples of how often this happens actually. So you really do want to look out for that, and eventually, as you get used to seeing it in its proper position, in its upright position, in a balanced position, your eye is going to get used to it, and you won't need to always have these like specific guidelines. You can just kind of work from your knowledge. But until then, it's better to just train your eye and recognize these things. Another important thing is when you draw the line down the middle, as you can see over here, it helps you actually figure out if the figure is drawn proportionally. So if you draw a head and you draw the line down the middle, you could recognize like, oh, okay, one side is a little bit bigger than the other. Whether it's the face, whether it's the body, the torso, the legs, even, you could just compare and see. It's just a reminder, in a sense. That guideline is also there to remind you, like, let me see and compare both sides to notice if there's any difference or not. It's just a cue in a way. And it's a visual aid. These are visual aids to just kind of develop a better, more confident understanding of the anatomy of the figure and all these other elements, such as position. Does it look balanced? Right, so that was pretty much it. This is also just an example of something that people do often as well. They make the head way too long. It's elongated, and it looks pretty weird. Especially if you completely disregard the head as a unit of measurement for the rest of the body. And sometimes you do have people who are great at drawing other parts of the body, but when it comes to the head or when it comes to the face, it's a different story. So remember that the head, it's important to start with it because it is the unit of measurement for the rest of the body. And over here, you could see that it's an example of what happens in this case when you don't take into account the shape of the head and whether, how it's going to shape the rest of the body. So over here, if you draw it weird, if you draw it, it kind of looks like a guitar pick, the rest of the body is going to be in proportion to that. So as we mentioned in the previous lessons, 3 heads going across measures the width of the body in its ideal form. So if you're going to take this width of the head and you're going to measure the rest of the body using it, it's just naturally going to come out to look this broad and weird. And same thing for other parts of the body as well. Once you determine the size of the hips, for example, right, you're going to measure the size of the hips is 1.5 heads. So once you take that measurement, let me see if I could grab my ruler and do it with the ruler instead. It's a lot easier in that way. So let's see, that's the width of the head. You could see it lines up at the shoulders. And then you're going to measure the hips, right? So it's a little bit wider, wider than what you would usually draw. But once you establish that, right, you draw out the hips, then you have to connect the torso to it. And this is why it becomes such like a weird narrow shape as well. It kind of resembles the guitar pick shape of the head, if you look at it really. So it just doesn't look right. You have to really consider the shape of the head and how you draw it. You don't want to draw it too narrow. You don't want it to draw it too broad or too round, in a sense. Like this example, it's missing a chin. You want to make sure it's something in between that. So that's the importance of using your sketchbook to draw basic shapes so that you could get better, quicker, and feel more comfortable doing them. And that way, when you're drawing the figure, you're not struggling with the rest of the body. All right, so with that said, let's just jump back into drawing the figure using these basic shapes. And I'll be showing you guys examples of how easy it becomes having to tackle the entire figure when you're using this method. So again, quickly, lightly, this is the fun part of the fun stage of drawing, or starting out your drawing, is that it's quick, it's kind of loose and messy. It doesn't have to be perfect and exact. But I'm just using basic shapes to create some form, to give some sort of boundaries. I'm not measuring anything really. It's just kind of like freehand sketching in a sense. And what makes it easier and what makes it faster is that I'm drawing something specific. I'm drawing shapes. It's not just squiggles and lines going in all over the place and not really having any form. Because I've been practicing basic shapes, because my mind just quickly is able to render them. Well, the hand-eye coordination of having to practice all of it and just being ingrained in sense that the figure is comprised of basic shapes kind of makes it faster and easier to sketch things out. I'm not pressing hard, and that's something really important for beginners. If you press hard while you're sketching, you're going to be disappointed because there'll be things that are off. You still haven't really practiced enough. So some things are going to be off here and there, and then when you go to erase them, they're just still going to be there. They're going to be ingrained in the paper. It's going to be harder for you to choose or create new lines because it's also not just a visual thing, it's a physical thing. When you press really hard on the paper, it creates an engraving on the paper. So when you try to draw something slightly smaller, your pencil will just fall into that groove. And then, you're just fighting it off, basically. So it's just not just visually. It's not just for visual aid to sketch lightly. It's also because physically it becomes a problem as well. And you want to avoid that. And you don't want to teach yourself that bad habit. So as you see, it's just a quick rendition of the figure in motion, and then from there it's easier to connect the dots in a way. You're able to just connect the knees to each other, connect the arm to each other, and you could work from there. Especially if you kept it light, it's a lot easier to build on top of it with harder lines, with darker lines. You don't necessarily have to even press hard to get darker lines. It could be just going over the same line several times, and then eventually it just gets darker. So that's just another thing to consider. it's also helpful to do gestural lines. Like, what direction is the body really going? You know, similar to here, when you draw the line going straight down, you're indicating, okay, this is the guide to show me that it's the figure is going to stand straight, and I'm just going to follow that to make sure my drawing maintains that. So you're taking this line and you're just shaping it in a direction that you want the figure to be in. So in this example, he's bent over and he's like jotting forward. I'm going to try to draw it smaller to fit it into this page without having to sacrifice other parts. Got the head here. Another cup shape kind of for the torso. Just want to give it more definition for you guys to see all the different parts, still maintaining the basic shapes. And what makes it easier is just following all these things that we talked about in the previous streams. You know, as I mentioned, drawing lightly is absolutely important, so I'm keeping that in mind. Sketching it out, that's also something that I'm keeping in mind. But while I'm doing that, I'm also thinking about all the measurements and the anatomical principles that I was discussing last week. Just using the head as a unit of measurement. So when I'm drawing the arm, I remember that it's supposed to be half the head as far as the width goes. So when I'm drawing the cylinder shapes for the arms, I'm just making sure that it's in proportion to the head size. And in this case, it's kind of abstracted, like you're not able to really see it, so it's kind of hard to judge. But you could, again, if you draw through, right? If you draw through the other objects that are getting in the way, you can get a better idea of it, and then it's easier for you to compare and say, okay, well, it is about half the size of the head, so that's about right. and then having to consider that both arms are two heads, I guess both halves are two heads in size, so as in one head for each half, then you could just draw according to it. So all this, and it kind of just becomes easier the more often you do it. And that's one of the reasons why I like to review, and I mention it so frequently to hopefully help you guys as well memorize all these things, all these guidelines and concepts. So when you sit down to draw, it's the same. It's there. It pops up in your mind. A little foreshortening there. The base of the cup is moving away from the angle from the camera, so it's wide at the top and narrow at the bottom. And just like any other part of the limbs, it's the same principle. Wide at the top, tapers off towards the bottom. You can draw another one here to fill up the page. I'm trying to also learn to draw through the objects. So in this case, there will be a point where they collide with each other, certain parts of the body. And it can be a little intimidating if you're just learning this process, if you're learning to use cylinder shapes as opposed to tracing the exterior of objects or body parts or a face or whatever it is that you're really drawing. It's a different method. It can be intimidating, and even if you're beginning with this method, it can be intimidating to try and build on top of it once you get like all the objects, all the shapes down and all the limbs down. You're like, okay, well, how do I, like looking at this, how do I build muscle from there? You know, like that becomes another problem to tackle. But it becomes easier when you challenge yourself to actually dive in and try to do it. You know, okay, well, the waist has to be connected, so I'm just going to do that. I'm going to connect it here. You know, and this is after you've made sure that the shapes, the basic shapes, really do follow the unit of measurement principles. So, you know, did you check to make sure that the width of the arm is half the head? Did you make sure to check the arm that, to check the body, the torso, to make sure that it is 2 heads wide? Let's just not talk about the shoulders in this example. So is it 2 heads wide? It's about right. And is it 2 heads high? It's also about right. So just from there, you know, you're already in a good direction. You're making sure that all the parts of the body are proportionate, anatomically correct. and then just try to connect all the limbs together. You know, add the knees. And play with it. Yeah, that's the main reason why you have a sketchbook. You don't want to have like finished pieces or just some parts of the sketchbook dedicated to experimenting, dedicated to just making mistakes and playing around with images and that sort of thing. That's really what it's about. You can even get 2 sketchbooks, right? One is purely for, to just, I guess, make it easier for yourself. One is purely for practicing and drawing all these different shapes. And the other one can be for final pieces, like if you wanna just do really polished work. Let's just say you can have a sketchbook dedicated just for that. And I think that's something that that I battled when I was drawing when I was younger. I wanted to make every single page look great. So when it didn't happen, I would just move on to the next page. It's disheartening, you know, sometimes, and that's totally understandable. When you sit down, you're motivated, but then the results aren't coming out the way that you expect them. I think it's just important to remember it's all a learning process. You can't expect right after you recite, let's say you're just learning the alphabet, right? You can't expect to, right after you recite the alphabet, to sit down and read the most complex words, know what they mean, etc., that sort of thing. You gotta understand it. It's a building process. It takes some time, and it's okay, and you just have to stick with it. I think that's why there's a lot of people who don't like reading as well, is that they don't like the frustration that comes from having less experience. You know, I think when and they get disheartened by like not understanding a word when they're reading something, or their attention kind of drifting to something else. And all this stuff, whether it's reading, playing music, drawing, painting, writing, whatever it is, it requires self-discipline. You know, your ability to just discipline yourself, like not have to depend on anybody to be there and say, now it's time for you to sit down and practice. Now it's time for you to sit and read. Or it's time for you to play music. And it's another very big challenge for people. You know, I think that's predominantly why a lot of people don't get a lot of stuff done, is because they're intimidated by that whole idea. You know, oh, I'm gonna need to sit down, and I'm gonna have a bunch of frustration that's gonna happen, just unavoidably, right? Unavoidably, I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna draw terrible work because I just haven't practiced enough, or I'm new to it. And that's the biggest hurdle. It's having to get over that, accept it, know that eventually that's not going to be the case. You know, if I continuously practice every day for 3 hours, it's not going to happen. Or even an hour, you know, even half an hour is better than nothing. So it's all wrapped up in that. And I think a lot of people are just like, oh, I don't have the quote unquote gift. Right? And what they're basically saying is that I don't have the ability to do something incredibly fast or understand it immediately, you know, or just do it like a prodigy, basically. So people don't like that they're not capable of doing it, and then they're seeing people who are able to. And this is just part of, you know, the idea that competition does not belong in the artistic field in general. It's very toxic because it unmotivates you, because you're comparing yourself to somebody else. And everybody has a different journey, everybody has a different path, some people got better education, some people have great parents who are able to do that, that whole, or teach them, because they have experience in that. There's a lot of things that factor into it. The important thing is that doesn't matter. The point is that you really want to learn something because you enjoy it. So if you really enjoy playing music, sure, it might take you longer than somebody else, but that's not the point. You're not doing it to beat that person, to be that person. You're doing it because you want to learn how to play music. You want to learn how to draw. And that's all that matters. So put in the time, and eventually put in the time, put in the effort, put in the focus. Even if your focus is drifting, just discipline yourself and say, nope, I gotta keep up with this. It's totally normal to have that. It's normal to wander at some point, daydream a little bit, and then like, oh wait, what just happened? Same thing with reading. Some people, when they're reading, they start to daydream, or an idea starts to take over, and then they're like, wait, what did I just read? They don't realize that they just read an entire paragraph and didn't absorb any of it, didn't understand any of it, and they have to reread it again. And that's normal. I think it's pretty much anybody and anyone who picks up any of those processes. It just happens. In some ways it's good. It's making you think. So even if you're drifting off, even if you're not focused on it, the fact that you are thinking about other things, that's also positive in a sense. So even in that negative scenario, you might have not registered everything that you've read, for example, but you were thinking about something, and you should take note of it. Oh, it's important for me to consider that. Or maybe it isn't, and you have to recognize that. But my point being is that it's totally normal, and it's not important. It's not an important indication of whether you're going to get better or not, or you're going to improve, or you're going to understand the material. I think it's important to just stop trying to chase this like speed when it comes to something, and focus more on just achieving the goal that you're aiming for. I want to learn how to draw. I want to get really good at anatomy, and just do it. Like that Shia LaBeouf video, just do it. Work through all that frustration, work through all that distraction and that sort of thing. You don't need to compete to achieve the goals that you set yourself out for. You just need discipline. Even people who are competitive still function on that mode, in that mode of self-disciplining. It's not just like, oh, one day they just wake up and everything is done for them in pilot mode. No, they have to think about it. They have to like focus in some way. It's just that they choose like a toxic direction. But I think that having to just self-discipline yourself, have that guiding voice in your mind. You have the side of you that is used to doing what you usually do every day, right? The habits that you formed for yourself. And as we know, habits are hard to break. You have that side of you that's used to doing a lot of things, like even when it comes to exercising and being on a good diet. Like, you have your habits, you have things that you usually eat, or you like stress eat. You're frustrated about something, and then you go and you taste something good, and it kind of takes that frustration away for a little bit. All those are habits. So you have one side of you that's used to things, and then you have the other side of you that wants to do better, that recognizes, I'm not getting good results from this. These things are actually getting in the way of me getting somewhere with whatever it is, whether it's in diet, whether it's reading. I'm distracting myself. I have to stay focused and just continuously work through it. Accept that you'll fail, or you'll sidetrack at some point. But as they always say, right, like every time you hear anybody talk about anything, when it comes to improvement, they always say, just jump back on it. You'll fail at some point, but the most important thing that's going to determine whether you're going to improve is what your determination. So if you mess up, let's say if you're on a diet and you end up slipping one day, it's not a big deal. It doesn't mean that everything is just going to go downhill from there. It's important to just jump back on it and keep pushing. And eventually it becomes like a habit to do. You'll break your own habit by doing the opposite over and over again, doing things that you should be doing over and over again. And you'll prefer that over what you usually do, because it's going to become more common in your day-to-day routine. And that applies to drawing as well. If you are constantly, let's say, pressing really hard, you have to focus and guide yourself and say, no, I have to press lightly. I was just pressing really hard. It's okay. I made the mistake. Let me go and press lightly from this point on. So all of it kind of it's just interesting. If you look at it, there's similarities despite all of them being very different endeavors. Let's say weight versus playing music versus drawing versus reading or writing. All of them share a commonality, which is self-discipline, being able to guide yourself and know these are things that I must do in order to get good results. And I have to keep doing them daily. I have to know that I have bad habits, and habits will come back, but I just have to overshadow them with good habits as much and as often as I can. Trying to see where else can I fit a body part. I'm going to try to do one here. And this is a challenge. This is just to demonstrate how once you understand a body in 3D, you're able to draw it and see it in any direction that you want. So this image is actually mirrored. The image I'm about to draw, I'm mirroring it. I'm flipping it to face the opposite direction. And this is a good example also of like how understanding certain principles can help do that as well. For example, I could either draw it the way I see it, in which case I would end up drawing the thumb on the opposite side. Or just know that thumbs face inwards when they're palm down. When they're palm up, they're facing out. So in this case, the hand is facing inwards. So the thumbs would be facing inward. So I don't have to refer to the reference. Yeah, I just know that principle, so I could just draw it. I'm tackling multiple challenges here. I'm flipping or mirroring the image, and I'm also drawing it while colliding with other parts or other objects on the page. And it makes for a messy drawing, but I do like that. It makes for more of a dynamic drawing as well. Like if you look at comic books, not everything is separate from each other. There's going to be points where some characters are going to be in the background and their foreground. So it's good to practice things like this, like, you know, objects colliding with each other. The head is in the forefront of the arm. The arm is in the back. Now, unfortunately, I can't draw the feet. Maybe just one foot. No, it seems like it's going to be an extension of the other arm. Even if I draw like that, I think. Yeah, doesn't look good. It's just behind his back. So as you guys could see from everything that I was talking about, drawing isn't just, you know, this magical thing. You sit down and like, oh, it's this gift, and the person doesn't even think about anything. It just comes out. You know, I think some people do have this idea that when it comes to like creativity, when it comes to people who are in the creative field, that it's just something that happens like that. Like you just sit down and like this voice in your mind is like guiding you to create all this stuff. What really it is just you're disciplining yourself in multiple ways. You're thinking about all these different things to come up with whatever it is that you're drawing on page. It's a thinking process. It's not just ability to draw stuff. You're really thinking about multiple things. getting closer. It's getting closer for the pages to end. I'm trying to wonder whether I should just draw really small figures here. Like in this area. See if I can draw like a tiny figure. Let's do it. Challenge. Challenge accepted. It's in perspective. So there's going to be foreshortening. More figures colliding. So that's going to be it for Drawing Basics today. Thanks for tuning in a little bit later, guys. Unfortunately, it was just something I couldn't avoid. But we still got an hour done of Drawing Basics. I will be taking a short break, 5-minute break, and I will be jumping into drawing comics. Where I'm going to be drawing this beautiful piece of work done by John Buscema, Conan the Barbarian, the movie special comic issue. And yeah, so stick around. I'll be right back.
Well, what can I say? It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Remember to save.
Well, what can I say?